G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now, as always, we have a lot to go over. Now, of course, we're going to look at strikes. We're going to look at geolocations and the importance of these strikes, as both Ukraine and Russia have suffered big, important losses over the past 24 hours, and some footage coming forward of that, and also some claims. So we'll talk about that. Now, the maps have really moved today in several directions. So I will show you that, as well as compared to other maps, and something I want to talk about with defensive works that is actually concerning to see. But it lines up exactly with what other interviews we have had are talking about, and something I will talk about in the future of a phone call that I had yesterday that was very important. We need to talk then about NATO, what the NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has said about Ukraine in NATO membership, as well as Hungary's involvement in all of that as well. We'll talk about that, and I want to talk about the hidden cost of war that we don't maybe speak about that much, and how this can be extremely high and it's going to become more and more of an issue the longer this goes on, and we have not yet seen anywhere near the most bloody battles of this war yet. Now, let me talk about that first off, that we haven't seen the most bloody battles. What do I mean? Well, the goals that Ukraine has set forth are to 1991 borders. The goals that Russia has set forth, well, it's not as clear as that. But regardless, we know that neither side here has achieved the goal of what they set out to do. Now, any goal either way in this is going to include massive infantry operations into cities. Now, we saw the losses of Avdiivka, in Bakhmut, in Mariupol, areas like this. But either way this goes, there's going to be much, much larger cities and warfare there. And, well, warfare in urban built-up environments coming from infantrymen is hell on earth. The three-dimensional warfare, three-dimensional environment, and that your armor's not really an urban asset, as well as other assets aren't as useful as in open ground. The losses will skyrocket from here, and you can talk about losses all you want, but by the end of this war, with an achievement of goals rather than diplomatic, we'll see massive, insane casualties, and we're not even seeing anywhere near of that. But before we talk about that and costs of this, let's talk about these strikes. Now, first off the bat, I do want to say that Budanov, the head of Ukraine's intelligence, GUR, has said the latest elements of the S-500 have appeared. This is, in principle, an experimental application. Well, they've already been appeared there. So he's talking about in Crimea that we're seeing Russian S-500 air defense there. Now, of course, what is the S-500? Well, S-200, 300, 400, 500's the better one. It's like if you're buying a Mazda 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know how they go, but exactly, I guess, like this. So it is the newer system. It will be interesting to see how that system performs. We know there's actually two variants of that system. There's a short range and a long range. Now, what I see Russia struggling actually with the most in air defense is short range. I think long range, we're seeing some success, but that short range, as far as ATACMS, I guess, medium range, but drones coming in, as well as then your typical HIMARS, things like that in large quantities, there's a gap there. And I've talked about this as well. And we see that maybe on the other side as well with things like your tornadoes and things like this. So it will be interesting to see if or what effect that then has. Now, we know Russia launched missile strikes overnight into Ukraine, and these were the claimed hits. So all the Shaheeds, all the X-101s, all the Kinzhals, and none of the Iskanders, but there was only one Iskander. That said, many people are calling this out because we know there was an Iskander hit yesterday down at an airbase, which I'll show you, and many people are saying the fires all across Kyiv and areas like this doesn't really show this. There's a lot of speculation about this, and this is one of the fires in Kyiv, and there's a lot more photographs coming out of this as well. That said, any evidence is impossible with strikes into Ukraine, as it is highly illegal to film any of this. But let's look at things that we know have been taken out. So this video here does show a Russian drone looking in on a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter aircraft. Remember, we saw at a different airbase a Ukrainian Su-25 taken out yesterday as well, with drone footage of that. Now, we can see up here, we'll see that strike. Now, it does appear to miss slightly. That said, exactly like if we take, one for one of, look, what happened to the Su-57, and we said, well, that was damaged. Shrapnel, blast, things like this have huge effect on airframes. So likely was damaged here, as we can see the aftermath here, and you can see this is where the aircraft is sitting. So very likely highly damaged or destroyed. Now that is then geolocated to here. Now this is Minarad, and this is where then that aircraft is sitting. Now, one thing I will point out with this is we had, of course, drone footage, drone over top, bringing in then that strike. Now, we have speculated about, is there some laser guidance on this, or is it for observation? We aren't sure. From then the northern border, it's about 170 kilometers, and then to the south, we're talking about 280, depending where that then came from, maybe 150, but a drone working deep behind the line. Now, just to the east of here, we have this. Now, of course, this is where that one we just looked at, and this is where we're now going to talk about that there was confirmation that then a S-300 system was taken out, the radar and the launches by an Iskander-M missile system as well. This has the drone overhead. Unsure if it is the same drone or not. As it was said, these were then very close together. So you can see the system, and then you'll see typical of an Iskander-M here overhead, and then we can see then the typical air defense cook off of the system here. Now, all of this as well will be in the Telegram if you'd like to watch it in more depth. Now, down in Crimea, of course, if you haven't seen this before, this is, of course, Crimea down here, very important area, and will become more and more important as this war goes on, depending on which way it goes. We know Russia does not want to give that up, neither does Ukraine. It's currently occupied by Russia. Now, we have then this being claimed, an attack and strike on Russian S-400 air defense complex near here, around in occupied Crimea, result in the destruction of this podlet radar. Remember, the radars on these are far more important than the launchers. And this type air defense system, one missile is visible in the images, but its condition is unknown. There are signs of burning suggesting possible presence of other launchers. Now, there's a hell of a lot of claims down in Crimea of S-300s, S-400s, all of this. How much damage does this really show to me? Yes, something here. Of course, a lot of burning around here that could have been something else, but I wouldn't say the complete system has been taken out. We'll wait if there's more satellite imagery actually comes out of that. We know there were strikes the other night as well, claims, and no sat imagery has come out yet. So I guess just wait, hold your horses on this. Now, coming from my background in the Australian Infantry, the Australian Army, we basically train in a lot of guerrilla asymmetrical warfare. And I'll be the first one to admit, I was quite naive to some elements of large-scale attritional war that we are seeing. But you remember that in Australia, we can't win an attritional war. Australia has a small population. We're very isolated. So we know we can't win that. Our defensive strategy of the army is a more guerrilla asymmetrical style. Because if an enemy lands on Australia, like if they get there, the Navy and Air Force is probably no more, and we're not going to go head-to-head, guy for guy, blow. Guy for guy, blow. Take it. Anyway, it will be a more guerrilla hit and run back and take out things. And that works. It's almost impossible to counter guerrilla style actions like this. Look at Afghanistan, point to Russia in Afghanistan or the US in Afghanistan. And we could see, I believe, more of that happening in Ukraine with special elements behind the line the longer this war goes on, especially if the front line really peters out. But one of the things is my eyes have been opened a lot to the cost of losses in war as well, not just because you're losing men and that's horrible, but funds given when people are lost as well, and how in large scale when you're losing thousands, how this then adds up. Now, this sort of came around from that Wagner article that Wagner had to pay $1.2 billion to just the loss in Bakhmut alone. Now, we'll talk about this. Of course, Putin signed a decree that paying beneficiaries of deceased servicemen 5 million rubles, or about $54,000 US. Now, this is, and we're not going to take into account in this injury compensation, rehabilitation, or pensions. This is purely to families of deceased. Meaning if we take that 54,000 number of the confirmed Russian casualties, we're up around $3 billion then paid out of this about $54,000. And well, we're going to prove that the US is the most underfunded, at least the boys on the front. ever as well in this. But Ukraine has released this. Relatives of missing soldiers can continue to receive their salary and their loved ones, cause of death, about $400,000 Now, Zelensky, of course, has stated that 30,000 soldiers were killed. Now, assuming all the paperwork was done and people were paid then correctly, this would amount to in the vicinity of $12 billion. And that is a hell of a lot of money. Now, I actually don't know what the Australian gratuity is. I looked it up. I couldn't actually find it. But for instance, let's have a look at the US. The US is a tax-free payment of $100,000. So a quarter that of Ukraine and double that of Russia, which is very interesting when we look at the GDP per capita. So let's have a look at the Russian GDP per capita. This is 15,000 USD, and the US is 76,500. So of course we have here that it's about 5 times the amount, in half then the payout. But when we look at Ukraine's here, Ukraine's GDP in 2022 was 4,500 USD compared to that 76 in America. Now I know this gets skewed by highly, highly wealthy, but regardless, and at more than 16.8 times larger for a 4 times larger, the US is 16 times larger GDP per capita with a quarter of that benefit given. And this shows you again that the US servicemen, I believe, are the most underpaid in the world, considering the billion-dollar B-2 bombers that they're bloody flying around. But one thing I want to say, and I wasn't good at this when I was in the military, get your paperwork done and have it correctly. This is not for you. It's for if you die, for your family. Get that shit sorted out. In regards to the military and your Aussie, Yanks, Ukrainians, wherever, get that shit sorted out properly. I know it sucks, but get it paid. But again, like I want to say, the US is criminally then underpaid. But like I said in the beginning, we have not yet seen anywhere near the bloodiest days of this war, pushing through defensive lines, cities. This will skyrocket, and this will become a huge problem for countries to continue financing into the future of tens of billions of dollars. And you can't, if you try to draw that money back or lower that, well, of course, you're going to run into massive morale issues at the front. So once it's sort of stuck, it can only go up. It can't go back down. And that's going to become an issue. And of course, like we spoke about yesterday, could we see then incentive to underreport casualties, as we know these for Russia and Ukraine are into the billions of dollars. And you can extrapolate out to whatever number you think the casualties are. You can extrapolate how high that cost then is becoming. Now let's have a look at the maps. I've teased you enough with my other bullshit that I talk about. Now we have seen some changes. Of course, here is Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, purple since 2014. Now, let's go into the Kharkiv Oblast here, and of course this Vovchansk front, where we see, very different to what a lot of bloggers are saying, we actually see a large Russian movement here. Now, personally, I think this isn't new. This 3 kilometers, then by how deep is this? 3.6 kilometers. Syriac has showed this and more since the very beginning here. I think it might have just been some new footage maybe popped up, and Deep State then changed this. But what we can see in this is then a change here on then the map, and that is interesting, as well as this pocket of isolated Russian troops that has popped out in here as well. But this is very different to what we have been talking about and what we are seeing, say, on Twitter, that Ukraine is being able to push all the way back through Vovchansk area as well. That Russia's still making advance here according to Ukraine's own map. More concerning in here, more concerning is this. Now, people are taking the piss out of this, and I think you need to apply the same logic one way as if the other, regardless of your bloody biases. That Deep State has released that Russia in here are building defensive works. Now, we can see that these defensive works sit in this territory of which they've now shown today. And they also show videos of these excavators and stuff getting hit. But the reason Russia would have pushed across here in these 2 specific areas, we know the defensive works here were minimal. We know that. Russia basically walked across. We've got photographs of the defensive works not being completed and criminal investigations going forward. That the reconnaissance aircraft or the drones, I should say, that were operating over here saw, hey, this is probably a good spot to go through, push through in those defensive works. Now, because Russia was allowed to get in here, they're building defensive works in here. Therefore, it's going to be far more difficult and far more costly now to push Russia back out, which we know Ukraine is committing to try and push Russia back out of here. This is not a good sign. Oh, look, it's only 2 k's from the border, these dickheads, blah, blah, blah. Defensive works are the biggest thing that Ukraine is struggling with due to where we see the front line moving. And this lines up exactly what Batman said in the interview 2 or 3 days ago, that the Russian forces are moving, digging in. And that is incredibly difficult then to push back. And of course, incredibly costly to then push through defensive work, then to push through a paddock with nothing in it. This is not a good sign of digging in there, because if Ukraine want to maintain that optic and push the Russians back out of the north, well, now they've got to go up against then defensive lines. Now let's talk about this, because we've seen some changes in then other areas on the map. Now, we're not seeing anything on this map then around Berestove. We did talk about this yesterday. Sorry, I'm actually in the wrong Berestove. Let's go down further to the south. This Berestove down here, apologies, into Viminka. Now, from here to where I've spoken about, no other changes shown on this map, but we can see then a Russian advancement out along then the train line here, and this is then backed up with Noel Reports' map showing basically the same area, although he's far thinner just up then the train line. But that is interesting to see movement there, and we know there's been some level of movement around Rozdalivka here as well. Of course, this sits to the north of Bakhmut, where we're not seeing any changes, but we know there's fierce fighting going on in the center of now Chasiv Yar. Of course, a lot of strikes going across. Now we come down into Avdiivka, and this is the pinnacle example of when defensive lines aren't to the standard they should be, of a withdraw, and you lose a lot of ground very quickly. And we're still not sure what the defensive lines behind here actually are. Let's have a look at this. Well, we start seeing some shifts today on this map. So to the west of Osheretny, we then see Russia has made an advancement. To the west of, well, so southwest of Solovov, we see another Russian advancement, and out from Netlyovo, we see a Russian advancement down across these reservoirs here. Of course, what this does is puts a huge pressure on whatever Ukrainian troops are in here, the defensive line. It's going to be difficult to push out of here. It's going to be difficult to push out of here, because I am not sure where the next crossing is up here to get back across this Vovcha River. This is putting a lot of pressure on this area, and I believe these open areas in here, we may see a withdrawal, push to more defensible positions in here as well. Now, this Osheretny up at the north here, let's have a look at what then Noel Reports says about this. Now, he shows into this small town up here. Does show very similar, but nowhere near the amount out to the south of here, although out near Sokil, he is showing fair bit more than this map. If we line up where then these reservoirs are, that Russia has made a break-in into Sokil. So this is why we look over different map sources, and Syriac, I believe, should be back in the next few days, and we'll get his map updates there, because a lot of these that we're still seeing trickle in now a week later, he had on the maps. But we then see into Nevelsky that Russia has, by Ukraine's own map, has conducted a break-in in here. Now, in this area from Pervomayersky down, we have seen this just creep forward. Now there's Nevelsky, and this puts, of course, all of this in risk down in here as well for defensive lines in here, and will, if this closes, then shorten the front line for Russia. Now, to the south of Krasnohivka, this is also showing that Russia has made some gains in here, and of course, threatening whatever grey zone sits down in here. Of course, small envelopments up and down the front line. We're not done yet. We come down Urozhany, Staromorsky, more ground being made in here. Remember, yesterday we got from Ukraine MOD saying that Ivanivsky and Staromorsky were under control. The map is showing, it is showing differently to this. No changes in Robotny, and then no changes down in Kherson either, although we do know that Russian VDV were present in here, so it should, in the green, so it should at least be grey on this map. But we can see significant changes on this, and many are saying, well, are we going to see that massive Russian push? You know, we've been warned that there's tens of thousands of troops and we're going to see a big push in. I don't believe that is how the war will go. The attritional doctrine of war is to have small small pushes on many different areas on the front line. If we just let's take Robotny as 1, Uruzani as 2, then we'll take this Krasnohivka 3. Let's just put this as 4 as 1, 5 in then to Chasiv Yar, I was going to say Bakhmut, 6 maybe Berestov, Siversk, and maybe a 7th up in here. So you've got 7 front lines active, moving troops around, and just small incremental gains on each one. That is what the doctrine of attritional warfare will say. That is what that doctrinally is attritional warfare. And I will say I'm no expert on that. I'm no general. And then even a lot of generals in the West don't have that much experience other than doctrine with attritional warfare. But it's interesting. Now, Ukraine, we know at the end of this, they want to have their 91 borders and, of course, then NATO EU membership. Now, we know there's a lot standing in the way of this. The main thing is the war here and pushing through these lines. And we know that if a deal is made where that isn't then the case, that may be difficult to get. Now, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has talked then about this, that this is referring to the peace summit this weekend. Military equipment, air defense, artillery, missiles, which are urgently needed to ensure Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. And without that, of course, there is no membership issue to be discussed. We need to ensure Ukraine prevail. That's an absolute minimum for Ukraine to become a member of the alliance. So if that is the minimum, I think that is concerning with what we are seeing over the past couple of years and the cost that it would mean to push back through here. Now, Hungary, they have stopped and blocked a hell of a lot going into Ukraine, although basically each time has been flipped through some fancy politics or leaning on some things as well. Now, this is from Jens as well, that Prime Minister Orban made it clear that, of course, they will adhere to older NATO obligations and also continue to finance the NATO common budget according to the agreed cost shares. And he also agreed that Hungary will not block any decision by other NATO allies on taking the lead of the provision of training and security assistance and not block, and a decision on the final pledge for other allies that is okay. So Hungary may be taking a step back in what they will block or veto, whatever. But again, NATO membership here, people just Hungary, and we see, of course, they put a clown face over here. It's going to be very difficult if that comes forward, because you've got Turkey, Slovakia, Hungary, and how other countries will see this and what it's going to look like at the end of the war, especially with the rebuilding costs and everything's going to be massive. Is Russia going to pay for it? Is frozen assets going to? Well, again, we don't know. We can't predict the future. I know everyone, depending on which side of the fucking fence they fall on, they have the conclusion in mind of success. That if you're a pro-Russian blogger, your conclusion that you've set is that Russia will be successful. And if you are a pro-Ukrainian blogger, you've set your conclusion that 100% successful clearance of this NATO EU. What I'm saying is, and this is why people hate me, is none of that yet is set into stone. There's a hell of a lot more fighting to go. Both sides have a hell of a lot more assets and men and money to continue this war for a long time. And of course, the human cost is rising day by day. Legends, have a great day. Look after yourself. Tomorrow's video may be late. I need to go see a surgeon about my elbow again. Anyway, thank you. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.